thing that bothers me.
That's good. I mean, that's said like a true general superintendent, I guess.
Like I just feel like that's not level.
So today I am joined by Mitch McDonald, the general superintendent at XL Construction. Mitch, thanks for coming on the podcast with me.
Happy to be here.
So Mitch, you and I met while serving on a technical advisory board out west, and I was immediately struck by a number of things in terms of your perspective on the industry and different processes. But maybe before we jump into some topics, I'm always fascinated by just how people get into construction. So, can you kind of introduce yourself and tell us how you kind of got into your current position?
Sure. So it's kind of in the blood. I'm a third generation superintendent. My grandfather on my father's side was a superintendent. My father was a superintendent. Like kind of brief history timeline. So I was born in San Francisco, and my dad was building in the city in the 60s and the early 70s. And my mother, weirdly enough, was running a leather and art shop not too far off of Haight-Ashbury. So those are the kind of the glory days of San Francisco in the 60s and 70s. Uh, he got a job offer to work for a outfit called Global Construction in Hawaii. So I was a young baby when we moved to Maui. That's where Global's corporate, or not corporate headquarters, but the Hawaiian headquarters were. And the first 6+ years of my life grew up in Maui as my dad worked as a superintendent for Global Construction, and my mom was a waiter or waitress, I should say. And then through a couple of very, maybe another a podcast for another day. Back in those days, the mob used to run construction companies. The FBI got involved. The RICO Act got involved. So his employer got messy enough that he was seeking a way out. So he sold the house that he had built for cash, packed everything up into a big box, flew us to LA. He bought a truck and a gooseneck camping trailer and took us all the way up into the mountains of Montana, built a couple of spec homes, and bought a dairy farm. So went from running construction projects to, I'm kind of doing construction. I think I want to run a dairy farm in the mountains of Montana. The nearest town was probably about 20 minutes away, Galton Gateway. I grew up close to South Cottonwood Canyon. South Cottonwood Creek ran through our farm. I went to a single room schoolhouse with 11 other kids all the way up until sixth grade. And then my mom was like, no, you need to get a better education than a one room schoolhouse can give you. So shipped me off to Bozeman, which was the nearest city about an hour away. Did that kind of classic American, played football, played high school sports, had the girlfriend who was a cheerleader. Left. My dad, the farm started to fail in the early 80s. That was kind of the end of the single family farm. He had to go back to construction to kind of keep the family afloat. Worked in Montana for a little bit, but eventually wound up back in California. Pretty much from when I was like 14, 15 on. And eventually I graduated with the understanding that, we're going to kind of coalesce the family unit back in California for a couple of different reasons. My parents' marriage dissolved, right? I think any time that you take that partnering and you separate them for that 3 years, things just changed. Both my parents wanted me to go to college, so I ended up going to San Diego State. I got a degree in marine geology.
Hmm.
Uh, Met my wife, Audra, went in college, 23 years old. Um, did go to work briefly uh, in my degree, was very miserable. My manager told me you should always work in something that gives you joy. And he asked me, what did I enjoy doing? And I said, I enjoy working on construction sites because I worked on my dad's construction sites even when he was down in California on winter and summer breaks, and even came up with him when he was trying to make a go of it in Montana. So left that company and answered a newspaper ad to Lusardi Construction. So went to work for Lusardi Construction as a carpenter. I was with them for 17 years, and then made a decision to join XL Construction around 2014, and kind of went from senior superintendent to general superintendent with Excel. Three kids. Mason's my oldest boy. Miles and Paige are twins. All graduated from high school, so kind of excited to be in that transitioning period as they kind of enter the next chapter of their lives. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
I love it. It's very thorough. And I think, I mean, there's a lot of layers there. But, one is like your dad was like the original millennial homesteader, right? Like kind of piecing out and buying the farm. I love that. Did that expose you to a lot of then farm life? Like, did you guys obviously have a bunch of animals that you were caring for?
Yeah, it was a dairy farm, so we had Guernseys and Jerseys, and the thing, any dairy farmer will tell you that you don't get a day off. So you farm the cows on Sundays. We milk the cows every day of the year. Christmas morning, we get up, we either go milk the cows and then come back and open our presents, or we get up and we open our presents and we go milk the cows. So there is no off day. There's no vacation days, right? There's no like, well, let's go to Hawaii or Mexico for 2 or 3 weeks, because then it's like, well, who's going to milk the cows?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would say that anybody that's involved in farming, you get a work ethic instilled in you, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, that's fair. So we moved. I think I've told you this to Richmond, Virginia. I have 12 acres, and I selected the easiest animal to raise, which is a chicken. And so we have 20 chickens, and even those require some work. And every time we want to piece out, it takes a little planning. So, do you say marine biology or geology?
Geology. So marine geology, this is where the dreaming of youth can come in. So I love mountains. I grew up in the Rockies. I spent a lot of my youth kind of scrambling around the Rockies with my dog Rover. And so I like rocks, right? And but I also like the ocean. So I had this weird dynamic of Hawaii gave me this love of the ocean and still the deep appreciation of the ocean. But then Montana and the Rockies of Montana gave me this love of mountains and the solidarity of mountains. I when I look at things, it's kind of weird. When I think about the ocean, I think about the ocean as being my mother, right? It's something that can wrap or embrace you and coddle you and keep you afloat. And I think the mountains is my father, right? This solid monument of support, right? Like all the difficulties that life will throw at a family are generally like broken upon, the mountains of the fathers, because they're, for some families, considered these, solid things that are not immovable, but can take it. And those two things combine to be like, well, marine geology is rocks and ocean. So I had this fantasy of, being out on an exploratory ship for offshore oil. It specializes in offshore oil. And so I had this concept and this dream of what this degree might bring me, but it didn't materialize. And what I learned thinking back, I'm a huge proponent of higher education. And then I'm specific in the term that I use, right? So I don't necessarily think that you need to go into the classic university systems or the college systems, but I think it's necessary when you're 18, early 20s. I don't think you're fully baked, right? You're kind of still fermenting, if you will, and you're kind of figuring things out, and you're still evolving cognitively. So if you take it upon yourself to improve and develop upon yourself by continuing your education, certainly classically in America is either a college or a university, but I think the dynamics changed a little bit now, where there's some other avenues available to you that certainly can be found online. But I'm a proponent of vocational schools, so I always encourage the younger folks that I work with of, if you're not quite sure how your life is going to unfold, then arming yourself with as much knowledge and information in that continuing education arena in your early 20s is something worthwhile. And you really need to decide what's the best avenue and route for you. And that might be, I don't go into college right away. I'm going to go get a job and I'll make some money and kind of figure out what I want to do. And then I'll jump into that, that next chapter with some understanding.
No, it's spot on. And I think in a global economy that requires such specialization, it's amazing that at a time when literally the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed, we're put in a position to kind of select a specialization that's going to inform the rest of our lives. Like I can resonate with your story because I was a business econ major coming out of college, and so I thought financial engineering was my future. And then I spent a year in that trade or in that field, and I couldn't dislike it anymore. And so that was kind of my journey back to construction. And so it is interesting the idea of how to expose yourself to the right kind of variety of things in that stage to give you a platform to kind of take the jump wherever it leads you, right?
Yeah, it's like that for me. Going to San Diego State and majoring in marine geology taught me how to research. It's one of those things where when you sometimes these terminologies and those words are used and you really don't understand the impact that they can have. To be able to understand how to research and how to look through things. I always tell people when I read a paper, one of the things I look into is the references, right? So most science papers are built upon these references. So those are kind of the meat, right? A lot of these references get sprinkled in to support whatever message that they're trying to convey. And I started getting interested in the references and that, I'm like microfiche old. So digging into a reference, it means I got to go find another microfiche and get it into the machine and da 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 da. But now with, embedded hyperlinks, being able to click on something, I call it the rabbit hole. I don't know. I've heard that term before, but it's like, I like to go down these rabbit holes where you're really kind of understanding where, you know, something that you didn't understand before and being able to go through that and navigate that really is beneficial if you understand how to research.
Yeah. So, and I can imagine that skill being deployed in a variety of ways later in your career. So, but before we get there, maybe, so you join Lusardi. This is in your early 20s.
Yeah, I joined Lusardi and so I'm turning 53 this year. I was born in 71 and I joined Lusardi in August of 97, so I was 26. I grew when I was 23 and I went to work for Lusardi when I was 26.
So, what does onboarding into Lusardi look like in the mid 90s?
I answered the newspaper ad. This is kind of funny. So I asked in the newspaper ad and they said, report to this project. Here's the project address. So I went to the project to start, and this was for Bryce Norman, and I think it was Aqualung. It was a tilt up in down in San Diego, Lucerne based in San Diego. And filled out a W4 form. And then why I smile about this is so even back then you needed to fill out an I-9. And I got 10 years later, I got a call from Dana McManus, who was our operations manager, and he said, hey, you never filled out your I-9. You need to fill out your I-9 and send it in. And I'm like, dang, it's been like 10 years.
10 years.
So that's like back then, it was literally like, okay, you're going to go to work. Here's where you're going to work. Go report there and, fill out your W-4. So we checked that box and I literally answered the email, got sent to the job, went to work August 22nd, 1997.
Yeah. And was this a pretty abrupt transition, or had you been building things on the farm and had a general sense of construction from your dad?
Yeah, so definitely building. So my dad started his own company and was working in what I call light commercial framing. So he'd frame residential houses and he taught me how to frame, and I would do that, whenever he needed me to do that. And then he started light commercial construction in Montana, and I would go work on those projects. And of course, if you're on the farm, you end up being a mechanic slash carpenter slash engineer slash like electrician slash plumber. Like if you're on the farm, you will eventually learn all trades. And then as well, I went to school, went to San Diego State, and then at San Diego State, specifically summer breaks, I was a free agent carpenter, so I'd go get a job framing houses in Fallbrook or whatever, or I went to work for Good Leader Construction, same thing. So I'd always been involved in building and construction. So by the time I got to Lusardi, was definitely a framing carpenter. So I knew how to put a house together. And Lusardi really specialized in tilt-ups. So it was easy for me to kind of slip into that structural concrete form setting career.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so you then spend 17 years at Lusardi. What were some of the lessons learned kind of that pop out from maybe your transition? Did you transition from field to office at Lusardi?
Yeah, I went. So at Lusardi, it's pretty much your carpenter, journeyman carpenter, lead carpenter, foreman, acting superintendent, project superintendent, right? So that's kind of the path that you go through. But when I left Lusardi, that they really didn't have a concept of senior superintendents. Lusardi liked to have everybody kind of at the same level. And there was a group of five, which was like a leadership group. But towards the end of my career at Lusardi, I was part of that group of five. So they definitely had defined the guys that they thought were going to bring some long-term value. So that progression for me happened pretty quickly. I was a carpenter and a foreman when Larry Letts, my old boss, started having me run work even as a foreman. So my first job I ran as a superintendent, quote unquote, right? Even though my title was foreman, I was an acting superintendent, was 1998. So
So
I,
that's
I
2 years
got,
later.
yeah, it was pretty quick. So I got exposed to running work pretty early on in my life. And, at the time it was fairly painful because I didn't know what I was doing. But like anything, right? If you do something early on and you continue to do it, the faster you start a career path, the more likely you're going to advance as far as you can. So I was able to start running work fairly and because of that, I was promoted to a general superintendent in my mid 40s, right? So roughly mid 20s to start running work, roughly mid 40s to becoming a general superintendent. In my opinion, in our industry, that's pretty quick. That's a pretty quick tick. Most general superintendents are, in their 50s, late 50s. So it helped starting my career early, running work early. And then for me, I had the ultimate cheat code in that my father, if I didn't know what, I'd just call it my dad. And I'd be like,
Yeah.
I got this dynamic and I got this issue. And my dad would be like, do this, and this. So it was also very beneficial to have this resource that was available to me at a phone call
Yeah.
to kind of guide me in the background.
Hmm. So in addition to maybe that support structure, when you look back at that time, what else separated you? Because I think we often talk about the idea of we promote doers, right? Those who do the best then get promoted to a management level, and it's kind of a different skill set. And so, like, what do you think kind of separated you early, so that it gave them a picture of, yeah, this guy needs to be running work.
I asked for it. So uh, I went from Aqua along with Bryce Norman to a project called Dura Pharmaceuticals. Larry Letts that was his last job as an active superintendent, and then he became the vice president of field operations. And I walked into Larry's office, I don't know, like 3 months into starting that job, and I said, I want to run work. I think I need to, I want to run work, give me something to run, and I want to run a project. And Larry kind of snickered and he's like, all right. And so the Dura Pharmaceuticals was their manufacturing building that we were building. We did a park construction with the admin building had been built before. And there was like a little kitchen expansion. And it was like pull equipment out, move a wall 4 feet, put the equipment back in, like that kind of a thing. And he was all like, okay, well, here's the plans and write a schedule. And I'll never forget. So I got graph paper because I'm like, I told him, I'm like, how do I write a schedule? And he's like, you don't write a schedule. I'm like, well, how do I do it? And he's like, get a piece of graph paper and on here, write down the activities that you understand they are to do. And then I want you to fill in the squares on the graph paper, at Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So on the graph paper, I'm like doing MTW and the whole across the graph paper. And then I just colored in the squares for the days that I thought those activities should be done. And then I thought I was really clever because I used different colors for the trades. And then I took my little graph paper and I gave it to Larry and I'm like, well, here's my schedule, right? Like he gave me the plans and Larry looked at me and he was like, okay, well, this is good. And da, 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 da. So to answer your question, it's that you have to raise your hand, right? If you want something It's not just desiring it. You have to raise your hand and go, yeah, I want to jump in the water.
And then you have to deliver, right? And
And
so,
then you have to deliver.
yeah. So, so you go from you raise your hand, you kind of jump in the arena, you start running work. What does, again, when you're kind of looking back, in terms of managing people, did anything kind of come up? What was from managing yourself to managing people? Did you have any kind of aha moments along the way?
I think the first thing is, so I was a young person that was managing people much older than me, and that is always a difficult dynamic, and especially in construction,
Hmm.
because I think we venerate our older builders, right? The guys and the gals that have the scars and have walked the walk, you hold them with a certain level of respect, right? When you look at somebody that has done it and they've done it over their career, and I really respect and honor the working men and women because that's a whole different dynamic, right? There's the managers are like, yeah, so it's very difficult and stressful. And then you talk to a rod buster who is working with hot metal rebar day in and day out. Always, put yourself in the right perspective, I guess is a good way of putting it. So for me, to answer your question, I think that one of the things that took me a little bit to get comfortable in my skin was directing the people that were could be my father. Right. So if you're a young man or woman who is put into a position where you're meant to manage and support and lead people that are significantly older than you, again, you have to keep that in the back of your mind of like, I don't want to diminish their experience and knowledge, but at the same time, I have to do my job. So then it becomes are you asking for feedback or input from the people that are older? And then are you taking that information that's given to you by these people that have the experience and knowledge and then utilizing it for your collective benefit? And then that's like an engagement, right? So if you can engage with somebody who, even if they're significantly older and they're helping you provide value to get the project done, what I learned was that a really good superintendent does not direct or order or tell. A really good superintendent guides, right? It's less about, well, you need to do it this way or this way, and more about and collectively, right? So if you think about all the subcontractors that are involved on a project, really successful superintendents, in my opinion, are those that can guide the collective masses for everyone's success. And once the people that are involved in the effort understand that they're all in it together, I believe that mankind is tribal, genetically speaking, instinctively, they'll bind together to complete the mission. But there's this kind of figuring out like, how is this going to work? Are you really in it for me? Am I going to really be in it for you? But once there's a certain level of trust that gets developed, that I call the ball, right? So once the ball starts rolling and the trades buy into this direction, then you're just guiding the ball. Like sometimes the ball slows down. You're like, no, 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 speed up. Sometimes the ball goes this way. You're like, no, 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 come back over here. Every once in a while, the ball starts going too fast, and you go, no, 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 slow down. So it's less about starting the momentum and more about keeping the momentum.
Hmm. Well, and I think also inherent in what you're saying too is this respect of the person closest to the work, right? Which is when you guide instead of direct, there's just this understanding that there's going to be things that you're not seeing that they're going to see. And that's why, that kind of motion is so important. And I think it was, Robert E. Lee in the Civil War, I think would always end his orders with, if possible, because he had a respect for understanding that there was variables that he wouldn't be able to see, right? And so it's interesting. It's interesting that that's a kind of a dictate as a part of your approach. So maybe kind of zooming out real quick. So you're running work, you're kind of figuring out what management looks like. You've got a new wife and a young family. Like, what does your work life balance look like at that point? Because you're in a new role, there's a lot of pressure. How are you managing that?
So at that time, so this goes back to that work-life balance thing. So it was all about the company, right? So the easiest way for me to describe this is like I bled Lusardi red. Whatever Lusardi asked me to do, I would do. That, I used to travel up to from San Diego. I would travel up to the Bay Area, and I remember my son was born, and I was there for the birth of my son, and we got the wife situated, and this was Mason, my firstborn. And then a week later, I'm like, I got to get back to the job. So I basically jumped in my truck and drove back up to the Bay Area. And every 2 weeks, I'd come down and I would, visit my wife or, I'd leave the job Friday noonish, drive all the way down to our house in San Diego, spend the night with her, spend Saturday with her. And then I wanted to be back on the job Sunday. So Sunday, in the morning, we'd say goodbye and I'd drive back up to the job. So for the first 6 months of my son's life, I saw him, I don't know, 6 times, 8 times. Because for me, the project was the most important thing, and the success of the project was the most important thing. And it had a lot to do with just that dynamic, of the American culture of, how do I put this? You put your success is measured in what you provide to your family and how much you can provide for your family. So at that point, and a lot of other people across many, many industries really took that of like your primary function in life as a man in America, right? Like if I just narrow it down to gender, sex, whatever you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
it is, hey, I'm here to provide and protect, and I'm here to do that to the best of my ability. I don't have to deal with fucking lions. I don't have to deal with ideal, so there's not much I can protect. So how do I maximize providing? So my number one priority, like my number one priority, number two, my priority, my number three, my priority was my career. Now looking back, hindsight being 2020, you will always need to chop water. There's a great saying, a Buddhist saying, even Buddha chopped wood and carried water, right? So no matter where you end up in life, no matter how successful you get, you still have to work, right? There's some level of work that is still undertaken. And it might not be in your professional life. Even a retired person has to do the dishes, right? And they have to cook and they have to clean the house. So the work never goes away. It's just when you retire, you're no longer paid for the work, but you still have to work. So I think for me back then, it was all about my career and all about work. Pros and cons. Pro accelerated through that advancement curve pretty quickly because it was the number one priority. Con, marriage suffered, not there for the kids, didn't have a strong connection with my younger children because they were not my priority.
How did we're in the midst of bit of your personal life, but I think as you look back, what were there triggers along the way, or what point were you able to look back and say, I don't have the balance? Like,
I think so. When I left Lusardi, I think that was the point where when you're in a company and the company it took me 2 years to get to the point where I was even able to leave Lusardi, right? Like it was one of those things where Scott Free was the CEO. He flew up and he's like, "What happened?" Like most of the company was like, "What? Mitch is leaving?" Like it didn't kind of, it wasn't even in reality kind of the thing because I'd done whatever they'd asked me to do. So that was kind of the point where it gave me that moment of reflection to go, okay, you know, maybe I can kind of wrap it up this way. So I would bleed, sweat, and cry for Lusardi at a moment's notice. But when I left Lusardi, I was like, I'm never gonna do that again. I reached out to a guy by the name of Mike. He owns MC Painting, and I wanted to have a conversation with him. And it was a simple conversation about, Mike, I'm thinking about leaving Lusardi, and I really value your opinion. And you just kind of provide me some guidance. And he said this a very simple thing to me. He said, Mitch, you always need to do right and what's good for you and your family, because the company will always do what's best for the company. And that guidance from Mike was really that understanding of like, The company's decisions will always be best for the company, and every once in a while they happen to align with what's best for you. But if you place what's best for the company in front of what's best for you, then your priorities are a little out of whack, right? So when you come to a point where what's best for you is not best for the company, what's then you have to make a decision. So that was like the first moment of reflection. And then I joined a new company and it's like, okay, well, now I got to prove myself again. So I went right back into company's most important thing. And from 2014 to 2018, I ran, work for them. And in 2018, they said, hey, we'd like you to be a general superintendent. The skill set that you need as a successful senior superintendent is 80% technical skills and 20% soft skills. The skill set you need to be a successful general superintendent is 80% soft skills and 20% technical skills. Like it's a radical shift, right? So there's throughout most industries, the skill set that got you through one stage is not necessarily the skill set that you need through the next stage. So when I got to the general superintendent and I really got exposed to um, that more predominantly soft skill role, again, enabled me to have the time and space to do that analysis of, am I really starting to prioritize things appropriately? With the, by 2008, my kids are in high school now, so I'm kind of running out of time, kind of a thing. So I'd say that to answer your question, that moment was where I was like, I really need to start working on how I can kind of have a better work-life balance. And what I got to was I don't call it a balance, I call it a rhythm. Because there are times in our industry when your workload increases and you've got to place more time and effort in that. Yeah, hopefully you have a career where there's a mountain of work and you tackle a mountain of work. And for the most part, there's usually a valley afterwards. And are you enjoying that valley, right? So I don't like balance so much because balance is this concept of, well, we want equal balance, and equal balance is hard to attain in any culture, right? The most of your time is spent working for somebody. So if it's like I want a balanced time, it's like, well, that's going to be hard to do because most jobs are 8 hours a day. Or I want to balance this or I want to balance that. So what I settled on was this work-life rhythm of understanding that there are times that you're going to have to put more effort and time into your work when it's needed. And then when it's not needed, then you can relax and pull back and maybe do something else that's not so work. And then to further expand on that, the pandemic kind of introduced to me, for me in particular, this is not something that I would advocate, but it works for me, is when I say I don't stop working, what I do is I look for opportunities to do some work that where I'm not like in the mornings, I wake up early, right? So I've been involved in construction my whole life. Like I wake up early. And, most of the time I'm up at 4:30 or 5, but the rest of my family is sleeping. So on a Saturday when I get up and I'm alone in the house in the morning and my family is sleeping, I might go into my office. I built an office in my garage during the pandemic and work on a schedule or work on emails. It's quiet time. I'm not intruding on that time frame of and I can get some appreciable work done. Me and my wife like to just be together, right? So in the evening, we will sit in our chairs and she'll look at her iPad and I have a Microsoft Surface and she's looking at, I don't know, news stories and I'm looking through emails. So for me, what I settled on is rather than try to do the, well, I clock in out at 8, I clock in at 8 and I clock out at 3:30. I clock in at 8 and I clock out at 3:30. What I got to the point of is more of a, am I doing my job? Am I finishing my work in a timely manner? And am I looking for the opportunities to do that at the same time looking for opportunities to be with my children or be with my wife?
I like that. I mean, there's a lot in there. I mean, I think it's a big topic as we look at mental health in the industry, as we look at technology coming into the industry that promises to improve things for the field teams and project members of that we know. How would you, for say someone coming into the industry, whether it's on the GC side and the office side, maybe as a PE, or someone coming into the trades in the field, what does that look like practically for that persona? Because there's a lot, because I think also what is coming into the heads of a lot of new, we'll say, entrants into the industry is a lot of other industries, whether it be tech or other industries that are trying to reflect a variety of work that maybe isn't realistic, whether it be, kombucha in the office and full-time remote. And, I just posted about this recently, which is, I think the idea of taking a full-time remote job right out of college is really detrimental to your long-term career because you lose out on so much of the interactions just through, the learning process through osmosis. So for new folks coming into the industry now, what do you think that work-life balance or work-life rhythm potentially looks like for someone trying to make it and trying to prove themselves?
Throw yourself into your work. If you're a young person coming out of college, my recommendation would be throw yourself into your work, learn as fast as you can, absorb as fast as you can, be very open, be very transparent, and just crunch. Like, work hard. And the harder you work in the beginning, how do I put this? If you invest the time and effort in the opening stages of your career, you will reap the benefits in following years. But yeah, my advice to any young person coming out of wherever they learn their continuing education is embrace this. I'm going to work my ass off because it is a short-term effort for a significant long-term gain. And the longer you sustain that maximal push, the more great it is. The dividends, right? If we turn this into a financial, is I'm going to invest a lot because I know that my dividend is going to be robust. So I would approach that same mentality of like, if we think about time and effort and how valuable time is, I would invest as much time and effort into your chosen career at that point for a multitude of different reasons. One of them being you might daylight that you don't like this career, right? It took me 6 months to realize that I didn't want a career in marine geology because it just did not materialize the way that I had fantasized. You spent a time in an industry where I'm sure, based on our conversations, you threw yourself into that career, and it didn't take you long to be like, wait a minute, this is not where I want my life to go, so I need to pivot. So it's not just gaining career advancement in that particular career path. It's also coming up to that fork in the road sooner rather than later and go, no, I don't want to get stuck in this job for 20 years because I just am making money. I want to go do something different. There's the people that find a different career later on in life, I'm happy for them and sad, right? Because I'm happy for them because they finally found something that brings them joy. I'm sad because they did not find that opportunity earlier.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And I think you're continuing your analogy of kind of tackling the mountain. I know the mountain doesn't change. There's always going to be a mountain. It's whether or not how you approach the mountain and learn from that experience, right? And I don't think that is a message a lot of young people want to hear, right? And I think if people are getting married later and later, I think statistically speaking, but for the folks that do get married young, I think it is a good message of, the only way, and I think this is industry agnostic feedback, which is the way to succeed is through hard work, right? The key point though that I think you've reflected on is, can you look at it through the lens of this is a season rather than a lifestyle? And I think that's the way to approach it in a more healthy way, it seems like.
This is just a phase, right? And this is not a phase that will last decades. This is if the time I generally started to the time I started running work was, like I said, it was literally like less than a couple of years. So
Yeah.
that phase of throwing yourself into your work, into that particular career path, is, in my opinion, worth doing that. Again, for a variety of reasons. I think that it will cement things for you one way or the other. But if you're not, and there to that having a spouse, right? There's understanding there's an emotional investment into a career path. And just like you, there's an emotional investment into your partner. That, and the reason why I'm poking at this is I think we're kind of trying to give some advice to younger folks is understanding that having an emotional support and just that statement, right? Like having emotional support, whether that's emotional support from a group of friends or emotional support from a religion or emotional support from a support group. There's many different ways that you can gather emotional support. Traditionally in America, it's through your partner, right? So if you do marry early on in life, then I would say this is where, if we go back to that work-life balance of like, so I am invested in partnering with a company for this reason. But if you're partnered early on in your life with a spouse, you also need to be aware and you need to provide that same investment into your spouse and into your partner. So then it becomes a little bit more of a balancing act, right? Because you don't want to. I think we had this conversation before where I call them cups, right? There's the physical energy cup, there's the mental energy cup, there's the emotional energy cup, and there's the spiritual energy cup. And just like if you're running a marathon, your physical energy cup can be drawn down. If you work on something and rinsed on something, you get mentally tired. Those things we understand, right? But I don't think we really understand that emotional energy can be drawn down. For me, spiritual energy can be drawn down. And are you aware of these things and are you working to refill your cup? So if you do find yourself with a partner and you're graced with somebody that is beneficial to you and might providing you emotional support, then make the time and effort to give that emotional support back. Again, for these long-term benefits.
In your role now, how are you seeing young folks approach this equation? Kind of the work-life balance, the work-life rhythm. Where do you think we're at from an industry if you were to kind of analyze the new folks?
So I think this is a very interesting time because so based on what happened with the pandemic, I think that was a big shakeup, right? I think that the work culture of America has been pulled into question because it was kind of forced upon us, right? And so, and I don't think it's kind of resolved itself, right? I think that the working population of America is still kind of trying to figure that out, right? And there's always the pollers, right? Like I want 100% remote and I want to be on a beach and to eat, doing my meetings online because this is what I want, and opposed to the guy that's all like, that sounds horrible. I want to be in the office and I want to crunch my 12 hours a day and I want to come on Saturday. I want to crunch on Saturday. So I think we're still kind of figuring it out, but collectively, from what I see in my industry, our production rates are down. And that's whether it's you're part of a GC or you're part of, and I think it's gotten down to less of an impact, but even at the trades level, it's caused people to pause and question about, I kind of like this because I found some benefit from it and I don't want to let go of it, but how do I keep hold of it? So I don't know where we're going to end up going, but I think that in the end, we will come back to that realization of you still got to chop wood and carry water. So if you want to be paid and you want to be paid well, you've got to put in the work.
Uh, yeah, I mean it's an interesting point, and there's almost like two different perspectives. Like if we put our commercial hats on, there's a very real impact on that perspective that your commercial hat's going to have. But then you put your human hat on, and hey, we all got to see, if you're blessed to have a wife that stays at home or not, but for me, my wife stays at home with our boys, and through the pandemic, I got a firsthand view of just how hard she works and how much work goes into raising kids. And so that motivated me even more to be part of that process, right? And And so I think with our human hats on, this is, again, depending on where kind of that excess time goes, but it's it's not something that I think we can say one size fits all. But I think to your point, there are some general principles around, hey, if you want to succeed, hard work is never not going to be part of that equation.
It, just to your point, so you got engaged with your family, and that could be like for me, that resonated for me because again, I was mandated to be at home, right, which was weird. I had that same engagement, and it was like I started cooking dinners and I started doing the dishes. I started working, but I started working in a different arena. Like I'm like
Hmm.
I guess my gut like whether you're working on your career or working on your relationship or working on the dishes or working here or working there or working on your kids, you're going to work, right? It's like you got to put in the work, whether that's working on your partnership with your wife or working on your relationship with your sons or working on your career or working on the yard. It's like you're not going to escape the work unless you win the lottery.
That's right. Um, and speaking to that point, in a leadership role now, how do you balance those two hats? Maybe the commercial hat and the human hat as you kind of mentor the next generation. Because for the audience listeners who don't know, I think you're a natural mentor, and I think I've had only a few conversations with you, and I've gotten wiser from each of them. So, but how do you kind of balance those two?
So one of the challenges that faces America is that we have this hang up on time, right? 9 to 5 or 7 to 3:30, right? There's this like, well, no, we have this defined work area of the day, and you clock in here and you clock out there, and you get you work from here to here. And I think that that is diminishing returns. And what I tell the young people is, do you understand your role? Do you understand your responsibilities? And if you can complete it, if we take the time element away, if you can complete the workload that is in front of you on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and we just look at it in terms of not time, but completion, right? So if I go very simple and I go, you have to write a paper, and the paper has to be delivered on this deadline. You could work equally over the days and work a little bit on that paper every day and have this available to you, or you could put more time and effort into it. Like you got some flexibility, but with the understanding that if you understand the deliverable and you understand the work that needs to be done, then if you can get your work done in a timely manner, then you've accomplished the role that's being asked of you to perform. So for the younger folks, I now go on, take away the, well, I'm done working at 3:30, and let's look at this of like, have you accomplished your responsibilities for that day, for that week, for that month? And if you have, then go do something that you want to do. So it's less about time and more about completion of product. And that seems to resonate with the young folks because I go, if you can come in at 6 a.m. and crush it for 6 hours head down, and you get the work done you need to get done, and you go, Mitch, I'm done with my work. I'm gonna go freaking ride my mountain bike in Santa Cruz, right? Like that's a thumbs up. But so you're accomplishing your workload, but you're not spreading it out over a period of time. I worked with a wonderful young lady years ago. She was so hardworking. She would work 14 hours a day, but she would get wrapped up in the details. And I think that for her 14 hours of on the clock, she was probably producing about 7 hours, like half, right? So I always kind of wanted to go, God, you work so hard, but you produce this much. Why don't you just rather than spreading it out over the 14 hours, just dive in and do what you need to do because you get it done, but you get it done over a long period of time. So that's how I frame it with the younger folks of like, are you accomplishing what needs to be done, and are you doing it with concentrated effort?
Yeah, that makes sense. On mentoring specifically, like you said earlier in the conversation, you had a really strong kind of support structure with your dad. Did that kind of, bleed into your own kind of mentoring motion, or at what point did you kind of embrace that role as kind of in the industry?
It's not so we got to rewind a little bit. Um, when somebody says, if a young person says, well, you need to develop me, I go, whoa, 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 I don't need to develop you. You need to develop you.
Hmm.
How you develop you is up to you, right? So whether that's online resources or books, or behind me on a shelf, I've got all the books because surprisingly enough, they hide information in books. So I was, and my mom taught me how to be an avid reader. So how you develop yourself and make yourself better is up to you, right? So it's not well, I'm ready to be developed, you develop me, and then I'm gonna reap the benefits of you developing me. And the reason why I wanted to kind of frame that first is that I don't go up to a person and go, you need my mentoring, and I'm going to mentor you, right? So what's happened over time is that, and because it's a very personal thing, right? So mentoring, to be a pupil of a mentor, means that you're going to be very vulnerable and very transparent and very open with your mentor, and you want to absorb, right? So there's a trust level for mentor to pupil that it has to be really established organically, and not forced, right? So the people that seek me for guidance or mentoring, then it's just like, okay, what's your question? Well, what do you want to know? Where do you want to take this? How can I help you? So it's less about, oh, I'm going to, I don't know, apply my mentoring powers to you, and more about if a young person or an older person, right? I'm working with a guy who's 57, and he's like, Mitch, can you teach me how to be better like a long-term planner? He's a senior superintendent, wants to understand how he can plan and coordinate better. So I'm mentoring Joe to be a better long-term planner. On the flip side of it, I have a young superintendent named Peter, and I'm kind of mentoring him because he's asking for these things of guidance. So if you want to be mentored, then you should be seeking resources that resonate with you and reaching out to them. I don't know
Yeah,
if I
yeah.
answered your question.
No, it's good. It's good guidance because I think ultimately, every survey reveals, more and more young people want to be mentored. But I think your point is spot on, which is it's not just a thing you receive. There's a part of the process that you have to take ownership of, right? And I think part of it is intellectual curiosity. To your point about books, and while we're on the subject of books, what are some of your favorites? What are some of your go tos?
Oh, it's all over the place. Well, so like I get like The Dopamine Nation is a good book. Atomic Habits is a good book. Hold on. I got so many books. What I am interested in is in that what I would call intelligent refinement. I try to seek sources that are outside. Everybody's got an echo chamber, especially now with the polarization of the country. But most people they find comfort in their echo chamber. And that's one of those things where it's easy enough to, if you have a confirmation bias, and or even if you have any biases and you are seeking reinforcement of those biases, you will find them, right? So then it becomes, are you challenging yourself to get outside of your comfort zone? And it's not necessarily accepting things, right? So there's, of course, some of our, like Tucker Carlson, right? A kind of a galvanizing individual. Every once in a while, I'll listen to a Tucker Carlson talk, because there are some points of view that I appreciate Tucker's opinion on. There are other times when I'll listen to a Rachel Maddow that's special, right? So you're talking about if you took two sources of information, and it's like Rachel Maddow and Tucker Carlson are like on the North and South Pole.
Yeah.
But there are times when Rachel will say something and I'm like, okay, I get that, I resonate with that. And there's other things she says like, no, I don't agree with that, right? And same with Tucker. So it's my go-to is not necessarily a particular genre. it's always kind of challenging me of, are we, here, I'll give you a great example. Here's the book that I'm reading right now, How to Be More Tree, right? So
Yes.
then these are the eternal life lessons of perennial happiness. And I find this book fascinating because it's just based on trees. Love where you live. The willow loves where it lives. So this is giving me something to think about from a different perspective.
Yeah.
I think that I really enjoy that concept of, are you present, right? Are you present in the now? There's Eckhart Tolle write a book called The Power of Now. And I had to read that book like 5 times because every time I read it, I'm like, what the hell are you saying? Like I never like it was like I really started, but I kept on coming back to it until it like finally like clicked with me. It's like, just be present, right? Like,
Mm.
don't worry about the past, don't worry about the future. Just try to be right here. Be present in what's going on right now.
Yeah.
So those are the things that I find, those are the things that make my curiosity peak and I see.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much to what you can learn from books. Like I think I was blessed to study abroad in college, and during that study abroad trip, I wasn't really into the drugs and alcohol scene like some of my colleagues, and so I just started reading, and yeah, and I didn't really stop to your point. So I know I want to be sensitive to your time, Mitch, so we can kind of wrap up. Maybe one more question. So we've got kind of an existential issue in construction. 40% of the workforce is going to drop out in 10 years. That's often cited, statistic. How do we make this industry more attractive? Right? We know there's hard work involved. We know there's all the different things, but what is going to be the ingredients that make this thing more attractive to people?
Well, I mean, so communication, outreach, right? I spent a lot of time going. I target high schools where I can go and talk to the people there's some high schools in California that still have vocational programs. So I tend to seek those high schools, and it's really communicating about what this career path looks like. So if we do trades as compared to, let's do trades, right? Because I'm a carpenter. When I go talk to the folks in the vocational programs, I go, I'm gonna talk through 2 career paths for you. So the first career path is, you're gonna go to university, and if you don't have the parents that are wealthy, most likely you're gonna get student loans. And you're gonna spend anywhere from 4 to 6 years at university, and you're gonna learn a degree, and you're probably gonna owe some bank or government a great deal of money. And then once you get this degree, now you've got to go find a job and start working your way up that career ladder. And that's great, right? That's certainly an avenue available to you. But here's another career path specific to the folks in the vocational programs is, you get out of college or you get out of high school and you start an apprenticeship program at a union, right? Whether that's electrical or plumbing, or obviously I advocate for carpenters because I am a carpenter, and most superintendents are former carpenters. The previous to where we're kind of tilting into a college sourced field engineer superintendents, most superintendents started their careers as carpenters. That that skill set lends itself to being a superintendent. So what I tell them is like, well, here's one path, but here's another path. You graduate from high school, you start an apprenticeship with the carpenters union, and we pay you and teach you at the same time. And when you're done in 5 years, right, and you're journeyman out, you will be making more money than engineers or architects or the vast, vast majority of the trades. And you'll be 23 years old. You need to be in the union for 30 years to be, full ride, which means you'll be 53 when you'll be able to access your pension. So if I said, I'm going to educate you, pay you to educate you, give you a salary that's at the top of the economic spectrum for America, that's available to most people, and if you put in the time and effort and work for 3 years, you can retire at the age of 53. When I kind of just simply communicate that out to the folks, and they see it for the first time, because for most of America, there's this. You got to go to college, you got to go to university, you got to go to college, you got to go. You'll never go anywhere if you don't have a university degree. And I'm like, well, that's not necessarily true, right? So that's, I think, the first step is that communicating what that career path looks like. And then the other thing is, to your point, so I'm a libertarian, which means I believe in free markets. And a free market has a supply demand, you know, if there is a low supply, there's a high demand. If you have a low supply and a high demand, the people that are in the low supply get to set their price, right? Because if a lot of people want this supply, now you're in a competition. So part of me is also like, the market will resolve this dynamic. It'll be painful, but as the supply of qualified, skilled construction specialists shrinks, the demand's going to go through the roof, which means now the salaries are going to go through the roof. And now you've got something that's enticing, right? So it's a twofold thing. Can we resolve it before we get to that precipice? I don't think all the way. Should we try? Absolutely. But once we're over that precipice and we get that dynamic of shrinking supply of skilled labor compared to a high demand, all of a sudden the numbers that are going to be involved and the people that can actually do it are going to go through the ceiling. And now you have an attractive career path.
Well, and I love that because one, you didn't reference AI, robotics, or any source of technology. And it was the most practical answer to that question I've ever heard. So that was fantastic, Mitch. Thanks for taking time with me. Yeah, any other thoughts before we go?
No, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no problem.